What do occult content creators do when they're in quarantine? Well, we chat with each other on video, of course. This is part 2 of a video conversation that I have with the one and only Joey Morris. If you haven't seen part 1 yet, then you're going to want to hop over to her channel and watch that first. Link in the video description box below. So this is something that I think occultists, online creators who are in the occult community are all going to experience. If you start talking about your personal gnosis, especially when it comes to working with God, goddess, divinities, spirits of any kind, you're going to get this. Someone saying, you're doing it wrong. That's not historically accurate. And like, okay, so I'll speak from the Chinese perspective. China is not monolithic. And then you also have to think about Taoism. It's also rooted in Taoism. And Taoism spread all over. It went to Korea, it went to Japan, which became Shinto. It went to Southeast Asia. And then the little pockets of Chinese diasporas. So what ends up happening is the fundamentals of these religions is that it's very nature-based, meaning if you leave a particular physical region, and you go to a different geographic region, that alchemy, the connection, the combination of your new natural space where you are in your life, plus that particular pillar of God or goddess, that what that looks like is going to change, which is why if you look at Chinese history, you have so many different lores, so many different manifestations of the same God or the same goddess, even Bodhisattva, Buddha, like there's so many different names and concepts of the one single spirit, because wherever people go and how their relationships with nature change, that divinity and how that divinity manifests will change. And even if you say all of this is true, and we're talking about, let's say all of this is like a physical, real form of divinity, like, you know, gods and goddesses are real, I do believe that they're going to change in terms of your vantage point. So when people say, oh, your experience of the Morrigan or your experience of whatever spirit is wrong, like, it's just, even if it what do you mean by it's historically inaccurate? That doesn't even make any sense, because history is constantly evolving. If you look at different pockets of cults, like cult as in like the practitioners of particular religions, if you look at different parts of regions and parts of time, they're all very, very, very different. So what do you mean by it's not historically accurate? That doesn't, or culturally accurate, what does that mean? So I find that almost to be racist in like a weird subconscious way, because you're saying there's only one correct like racial or cultural way to practice a particular religion. So okay, off soapbox. I like that's when I look down on people, because it's like it's the lack of knowledge, it's the lack of like just real like intellect that makes people say things like that.
I mean, I agree, and the Celtic stuff is true for that too, because the Celtic pantheon religion, however you want to state it, was tribal, and so it was spread out from, you know, places in Ireland. They traveled to Wales, they were in Gaul, you know, in Germany, and they were spread out all over the place. They traveled. Some Celts got made off with by the Vikings, and I keep saying that I think it's Sweden where they went and took their Celtic wives. I remember learning about that when I went over there, and I was like, that was quite funny. So they were already tribal. And apart from that, something that these people should know is history isn't fact. The Celtic religion is written down by Christian monks, which these people know, and those people will have destroyed text, rewritten text, changed the narrative to fit their ideology. You can see it in the Morrigan going from goddess of death to a fairy in some of the texts, that they wanted to take away her power, or Brigid going to a saint, you know. And they wanted to change how people were interacting with the stories of their ancestors. So even the texts that we have remaining, which aren't many, because the Celts were oracular and didn't believe in writing things down, a lot of it is gone. A lot of it is lost. We don't know what the information is. I remember this one thing happens, and I associate myself with fox energy, and one of them had been saying, you can't be a fox under the Morrigan, that's wrong, that's not one of her animals, blah blah blah. There's actually a direct quote from somewhere, which is, it lists fox among the night howlers, and I was like, yes. The minute you find that one bit of like text from the ancient Celts, as technically Christians, but you're like, there it is, there's my ancient text See you later. But history is written by people, and that's just as fallible as people are. So as well as like things moving around, as well as the way that the land affects these things, there's how people have interpreted and written things down and mistranslated, and what they've taken from certain things and changed, even made up. Robert Graves is well known in the Celtic community for making stuff up in his Celtic analysis of how they used to practice. So that's another problem with that, which it drives me crazy that people think there is one answer, one solution. That to me is negative. I agree.
The irony is, we all understand on some level that history is always written by the dominant, whoever is dominating,
The
right?
winners, yeah.
The marginalized, the history, the perspective and vantage point, the experiences and practices of the marginalized are never recorded, or very rarely recorded in the way that they would, in a very authentic way to their voice in the records and annals, right? And what are occultists? No matter where you go in the world, the occultists are always the ones who are marginalized. The witches are always the ones who are marginalized. And so yet in a twist of irony, we're saying, well, we're going to look at dominant history to verify our marginalized experiences and practices. It's like the biggest irony of our community.
Yeah. And I mean, I love history. I love finding out whatever I can find out about how things used to be practiced. But I am a big believer in that deity evolves. And I don't think that they would, because it doesn't make sense to me otherwise. It's like, yes, the Morrigan has not evolved since the time of Celts. She wants us all to behave like Celts. We're ignoring the internet, which all these people are talking on, by the way. That's where all the people are arguing, on the internet, ancient Celt technology. It doesn't make sense. Of course they evolve. Of course they change and shift. Of course they understand. They're integral to us and we're integral to them. So as we evolve, surely so do they.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a little off topic. I'm on my soapbox now. Yeah. So I think if you come into that contact with that kind of negativity in the community, it's kind of an initiation. Welcome to the community. But it can be really disheartening. It was really disheartening for me. I nearly packed my bags and left. So it was the only time I've ever really felt like that. And I
think how we can bring this back to like how this relates to the topic is,
Yeah.
a lot of us as consumers, right, who want to consume content, I'm always more interested when people talk about their personal experiences with spirit. I find that to be the most interesting videos. If there's a video about someone talking about their experiences with spirit, and it's 40 minutes, I'll watch it. You know what I mean? Like, it's something that's fascinating to me. It doesn't even matter if I agree or disagree, if I even know or understand the spirit they're talking about. It's just fascinating. And I think I'm not the only one. I think we all agree. If you hear somebody talk about spirit from a different culture, that's even more fascinating to you, right? But why do we never see, or why do we rarely see that kind of content in our community? Is because no single person in this community has ever made that kind of video and not received a whole bunch of flack for it. So you learn very quickly, if you touch the stove and it's hot, you're going to burn yourself. You're not going to touch again. So people stop making those kind of videos. And then the community complains, oh, why do we have like really superficial content about like unboxings and look at this? It's because you get less negativity when the video is that like plain vanilla, right? When you get to any level of depth, or when it gets extremely personal, those invite the most like vicious negativity, and yet those are the most vulnerable videos. Like, it takes the most vulnerability and courage to create those videos, and you just don't get the reward. You don't get the emotional, spiritual reward for putting yourself out there like that. That's why we don't have that kind of content.
I remember one video I was talking about I called it crow speak, I think, or something along those lines. And I remember to this day because someone was in the comments telling me I was lying and making stuff up because they didn't understand what I was talking about. And I was like, okay. Like, and that's what we mean. That's the sort of comment. And what are you supposed to do with that? That's not like, you're not lying. you know what you're saying is based on your personal gnosis, or whatever it's based on. Maybe it's a combination of research and meditation and then alter time, and it's a combination of all these things, and then you make the video discussing it, and then you're a liar. And that is why people stop doing it. I think that is what, over the years, why people have quit, why people have walked away, why some people are behind Patreon walls for a lot of their content, is because it's just protecting their mental and emotional well-being, because these things do have an impact. They do stress people out. They stress people's families and friends and loved ones out. I've seen firsthand, like, people around me being like, you're going to have to find a way of dealing with this, because it's just stressing you out behind the scenes. This is a few years back now, because I have learned how to handle it better than I used to, because it just used to get to me almost unfiltered, or like, because it was very raw for me, putting content out that mattered. So it's a very vulnerable position when you think about it, because you're basically letting people into your life, your heart, your soul in some circumstances, and it's very raw and very vulnerable, and then some people just stomp all over that. So it can be incredibly difficult to learn to either have a thicker skin, or not to take on those comments, or kind of have a way of seeing the screen and then walking away from that and considering it to be like almost two different versions of yourself, things like that. But how have you learned to distance yourself from comments, or do you think you have?
I haven't, but I think now I remember what I wanted to say about the whole thicker skin thing. So I think that also bothers me when people say that. Like, when people say like, oh, well, it doesn't bother. Like, I've talked to some really big names, not in the occult community, but other other areas of social influencing. And if you get them to actually be candid, I don't know a single person where it doesn't actually affect them. Like, it affects everybody. We just deal with it differently. Some people are like, well, I'm not going to talk openly about it, because if I publicly like acknowledge that I'm bothered by it, or I publicly acknowledge I'm this big, top, high and mighty person who's reading these lowly comments, it makes me look like, people have these like concepts in their mind, so they just basically refuse to acknowledge that this thing is even going on. And then people believe if they don't mention it, then it must mean they don't care. So when you do acknowledge that it bothers you, you're the one who ends up looking like the weird person. You're the one who's saying the emperor has no clothes on. You know what I mean? Like, you're the one who looks weird, because like, well, why does it bother you? It doesn't bother so and so. It doesn't bother this person. I've spoken to that person. That it definitely bothers that person. They're just not going to go on the internet and confess it to everybody, because the thing is, why would they? Why should they? Look what happens to you when you acknowledge it. Why the hell would they acknowledge it? So that always bothers me, the whole idea of having thicker skin. And then the people who I do see genuinely having thicker skin, and now I'm going to be very negative, so you're going to come from me for now. People who actually have the thicker skin, it's because they're not emotionally and sincerely invested in the content that they've put out there. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like if it's something that is sincere, and it's something that you really invested sincerity and authenticity in, how can you have, like, I just feel like it's very difficult, if not impossible, to actually have thick skin around that thing if it's something that's purely professional. So for example, in law, in litigation, it's very, very oppositional. I do have a thick skin in litigation because it's not personal. I'm not putting myself out there in any way that's vulnerable. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, so when it's combative in that professional sense, I don't have any issue with it. In fact, I thrive on the competition because it's purely professional. I'm not investing any level of vulnerability into it. So if someone is putting out content that's vulnerable and then they say I have thick skin around that, that's just bullshit.
Yeah, I can definitely see how it's a very vulnerable position to put yourself in when you're putting content out that really means something to you and really matters. I think that was part of why the poetry upset me so much, because it wasn't a video of me defining the Morrigan. It wasn't me saying that I knew something about the Morrigan. It was just devotion. It was just playing with words and poetry in the beginning, and all of the hatred that came down on that was hard, was tough, it sucked. I didn't know what to do with it at all. And it made me question my path at that point. It's quite early on in when I was on YouTube, and it was making me question myself. And it definitely has that effect that you don't know just how much a dramatic effect these things can have. Like, it's ruined marriages for people, it's ruined friendships for people, it's like driven people to have emotional breakdowns and things, and they've had to leave. And that's not just in the spiritual community, that's like across the board of people who are on YouTube or online and putting content out where it does affect them. So it definitely does hurt people, especially when it means something to them. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I think another thing, just sort of more like in terms of what's going on behind the scenes, a lot of the major influencers, none of them are doing what they're doing without a therapist. Like
Mm-hmm.
they all have, especially the ones who are really, really big that you know about, they have like a team of therapists who are helping them navigate that kind of destructive content that is out there being put out against them. And so you have it at that level. But when you have most content creators who still have a semi-public, platform, they don't have access to that kind of resource where they have all of this, support, mental well-being, mental support. And so they experience a lot of the same thing, but then they have no support to help them navigate those situations. And I think we forget about that. I think we lump everybody into the same category, and that's just not true. I think when you get to the mid-tier, lower to mid-tier like content creators, and those people with public platforms, I don't know, I just feel like the destructive behavior and the negativity toward them is particularly vile.
Mm-hmm. And it must really, in our community at least, it has a spiritual effect too. Because if we're open to energy, right, if we're open to the spiritual conversation and how that impacts us in other areas of our life, then that almost becomes like its own ugly little force that can worm its way into your energy, into your life, and it takes on another the kind of dimension that maybe other people in different communities don't even, but they might sense it maybe, but they're not really as open to it as people will be who are looking at, vibrations other than themselves. So that takes on a whole other kind of, when I think about it, this is what, people talking about cleansing themselves and cleansing the computer and all that need, because they're more sensitive to that. So it takes on that dimension as well for people.
Yeah, I think like the negativity happens in every community, but I think the people who are drawn toward the spiritual communities are just going to be particularly more sensitive, and so you're right. I think the effects, it's not that the negativity is different in our community. I just speculate that the effects of the negativity is far more, like, is far deeper, because
Mm,
people are letting in a lot more. And for a
yeah.
lot of them, even if they're creating a business or they're trying to, pay the bills with what they're doing online, you don't do this kind of work without having some fundamental passion for it. And so when people attack you for your beliefs, it is a next level. It's very different from attacking you because you're a makeup guru or you're a booktuber. I think it's very different when you're putting out content that's about your spiritual beliefs.
Mm. And it's very difficult in some ways. It's even more difficult to defend yourself, because if you're arguing about something which is to do with makeup, right, you can get the facts on where you bought it, you can get the ingredient list, and that's usually the end of it. But with spirituality, it's so personal, and you can't generally, it can't be like, here's the proof, because spirituality is based on faith. When it gets down to it, like, we might have shared personal gnosis, which is the big thing that's going around right now, for better or worse. Like, when it's shared personal gnosis, it has more validity. I'll just raise my eyebrow and move on from that thought, but that is that is one of the things that's being said right now. But outside of that, and some sources that we might have from history, facts don't really exist in the same way that they do in other communities. So when someone comes at you with a whole load of negativity, and you feel that you have to justify yourself in response, or you feel you have to prove something, in response, which I think is probably one of the most natural responses to negativity that there is. You want to push back, right? You want to be like, no, it's not like that, it's like this, and yes, I do believe it, and here's how. And people want to like prove themselves in a way when they come up against negativity, and in the spiritual realm that's really difficult to do.
Speaking of shared personal gnosis, I have so much to say about that. When you understand human nature on any capacity, and you realize how easily we are manipulated, like how easy it is to make impressions on some micro level that they don't even realize that they're being manipulated. You know, when you understand, just, and you see it in other ways all across our society, when you understand how easy it is to manipulate people into believing there is a shared personal gnosis, like it's very scary, it's extremely scary, it's petrifying, in fact. And two, it makes you realize how important it is to really question this concept of shared personal gnosis and constantly doubt yourself, not doubt other people. You know, I think that's our problem. When we actually doubt ourselves instead of dealing with that, you know, it's like, oh well, Joey's experience of the crow is different from mine, therefore she's wrong, so I'm going to go and attack her because I'm not going to sit here and work with my own concept of faith. And so I think that's really, really dangerous.
Yeah.
People should be very wary of shared personal gnosis. There's so much, and think about like what's popular. It's all about branding, how you perceive what witchcraft is, how you perceive what anything is, how you perceive what particular content creators and influencers, who they are. It's all branding. Who succeeds and who doesn't, like what voices become authoritative and what voices do not become authoritative. It's all about branding. If you really discern content, I know so many incredible tarot scholars who never make it in the community because they don't understand branding. Every single 100%, not like 50, 100% of the people who make it, who are publicly visible, understand intuitively the concept of branding. And that's so scary. Like that's petrifying that it's all branding and public perception. So be very wary of shared personal gnosis. Off soapbox.
I'm just thinking about how branding actually might affect us in terms of negativity, actually, because if people have an expectation based on branding, then they can have very negative reactions to something which is maybe off brand or is threatening to their understanding of the world around them, which is based on, it's kind of like a brainwashing, but based on the branding of something that they have seen over and over and over again. So in terms of witchcraft, the people being like, well, that's not witchcraft, because they have seen what witchcraft is, perhaps through what they have experienced, but also through multitudes of branding. And so they then reject out of hand something which is more unique, or because unique is very difficult to pull off, especially in the modern time, but more unique than the general slew of what they are seeing in terms of witchcraft. And I could do that in terms of aesthetic really easily, because I think what we see in terms of witchcraft aesthetic is I'm going to say one of two things. It's either the very dark, very gothic, very occult imagery of witchcraft, with your black candles and your death images and the you know, the drapes over everything, and that aspect, which is really popular, kind of Victoriana Gothic. Or you go the other route, which is very high vibe, lots of crystals, lots of candles, lots of bright colors, Himalayan salt lamps everywhere, and that is the other side. You might get a mix of the two, which is somewhere like the natural witchcraft that does pop in with like the twigs on the altar and the berries on the altar, and that's somewhere in the middle. So maybe there's three. But then if you see, sometimes when people see things that are just so far outside of that, whoa, negativity just comes flooding out, because they are so used to the idea that this is what witchcraft is, and they feel comfortable in that space, so they feel self-assured that what they're doing is right, that when anything comes out that challenges that conception, even in aesthetic terms, there's a lot of hostility and a lot of negativity. Have you found that to be the case?
it's not even just the unique ones. I think it's even the polar extremes that you were talking about. Like if you just, for the sake of easy conversation, I'm just going to say dark and light. Obviously, I don't believe that. I'm just saying it because I don't want to, it's just easier, right? So for the
Yep.
sake of, convenience of conversation, you also see that combative, like tension between the perspective of the dark and the perspective of the light. It's just it's weird where if you actually, I don't want to say, I feel like, let me backtrack. Like I think if you're sensitive to energy, it's creative energy, destructive energy. It's just cycles of nature that are so
Mm-hmm.
neutral and so void of morality and so void of these concepts of good and evil. Good and evil is how it affects me, right? That's all
Mm-hmm.
it is. If it benefits me, it's good. If it's negative toward me, it's evil. And that's the extent of what good versus evil is. It's so subjective, it's so personal. And yet you see practitioners of witchcraft having these arguments of morality in the community. I always find that to be extremely amusing.
That's interesting as well, because there are definitely cycles of negativity that affect us in the witch community that happen between witches and that come in cycles of negativity. I've noticed this, and to the point where I refuse to get involved with it because I have seen it over the years happen many, many, many times. And I've seen like the real witch argument, which drives me insane. You're only a real witch if you do this, that, or the other. And it's like, ugh. And then there's the how dare you charge for anything if you're a witch argument, which also drives me insane as a spiritual business owner who pours her heart and soul into making things which are affordable. It's not like I'm living in my diamond castle of what I'm doing. So that is a cycle of negativity that comes around quite frequently in witch cycles. And I feel like these things just keep rearing their heads with pagans and witches and people. And I have no clue how we deal with that. Have you got any idea how we deal with that?
I have always observed that as a very Christian thing. Like it just seems very, very Christian because if you leave cultures where Christianity has as much of a hold, I mean, let's not talk about imperialism and all that, but like where you still have, other cultural perspectives dominate, there's less of that, witches should not charge. I don't see that as much. Like in my community, I really don't see that. It's actually presumed that you're going to charge, and if you don't charge, then they're actually very skeptical, because if you're not charging for it and it's not money that I can see, like a bargain for exchange, what am I giving you? Like what is it that I'm actually giving you that I don't even realize I'm giving up in exchange for this thing? So other communities outside of the very Christian dominant community don't share that perspective. And I
Mm,
find that it's really interesting that in the Christian world, like the Christian dominant cultures, where witches are trying so hard to push back against any influence of Christianity in their practice. And you see it almost to a very like, oh, there's no such thing as Christian witches. Or whenever, like just recently, I was watching a television show. It's so stupid, but it was a TV show. One of the witches in the TV show, was reciting psalms to heal somebody. Okay. And then one
mm,
of the reviewers is like, I'm an actual witch, and that is bullshit. Real witches don't use psalms to heal people. It's a stupid comment. I remember thinking, that is hilarious. Like, you know what I mean? So in the witch community, they push back against any infiltration of Christianity so hard. And yet at
mm.
the same time, they hold these perspectives that I find to be so fundamentally Christian.
Yeah. I will say as well, of course, obviously, hoodoo practitioners do use psalms. So,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
Let's not even get into Solomonic magic, right? Like, like right. I know, but I thought that was hilarious. Like, I can't even right now. Like, nothing. I've got nothing.
Yeah. That's something that definitely I've noticed that happens. Like you should be going back to when witches traded favors, milk for, spells. And I'm thinking, well, people in America would have a job sending me milk for spells. It's a bit of a stretch, but it is interesting how those affect us, and how people sometimes get very invested into that negativity, where it becomes like the witch wars that you see happening with people picking on people and rallying in groups to pick on other groups of people. And that's like negativity given life. It is the weirdest thing to me. I know it's easy to fall out with people, right? That happens. People disagree, people don't like each other. That happens in every walk of life. But when it comes to a point where it's like a witch war, and you're like, are we on TV? What is happening right now? And I don't know if it's just boredom, and it creates a sense of almost like entertainment or purpose for people. But that is a weird negativity cycle that I've noticed that happens too. And the best thing to do is usually just to step away from it, to be honest. That's been my reaction most of the time, is like, no.
What's interesting is just in terms of history, I know among like Taoist esoteric sects, you have like back to 100 BC, we have records of what I would call witch wars. You have different sects of occult practitioners and alchemists who are saying the other guy is doing it wrong, or the other guy is perverting the practice. So like the concept of witch wars is really as old as anything. It's just funny that we're still doing the same thing even today.
We're repeating history because we haven't learned anything. Apparently, we're still going. Yeah, so it's been around a while, folks, is what we're learning. Witch wars are not new. It just takes on a whole different dimension when we're doing it with a camera.
Although I don't know if it's because I haven't seen it or it's really a thing. I haven't actually seen that many witch wars recently. I know just 10 years ago you saw like real, like legit witch wars going on YouTube where people would call each other out by name, or it was so obvious who they were talking about. So you did see it, like the drama before, like 10 years ago. I haven't actually seen it that much recently, or is that just me?
I haven't seen it that much recently either, I don't think. I don't know if it was because people were scaling back from YouTube, so people were leaving, people were going to Patreon, like we already said, so maybe there was less opportunity for that. It has died off in more recent times, although it may just be that I'm not paying attention to it because I really don't pay attention to it anymore. It did used to happen, to my knowledge at least, way more a bit back in the day.
Oh yeah.
But I mean, some of the major personalities did leave, and for all sorts of reasons. So there may have been some of that too, that the next generation was maybe calmer, maybe. Or maybe it was just a bad look for people, and they realized it wasn't helpful. So maybe they did learn from that, maybe. And I mean, it's happening on TikTok, supposedly. I don't know because I haven't seen any of it. Like, I ignore it all, but it is supposedly happening on there right now with the drama and the flaming and the how they manage this in 1 minute videos at most. I don't know, but apparently it's a thing. So apparently negativity breeds where people congregate, unfortunately.
Yeah, I guess maybe it's just that we're too old already, which is weird. I guess it's no longer on the platforms that I tend to reside on, because I'm not on TikTok in any like significant ways. I have no idea what's going on over there. But I think that goes back to the negativity. I think, at least to my knowledge, a lot of the major players who left, even if there's like personal reasons that have nothing to do with YouTube, it can be for sure, but it's a combination. It's never one thing, because if there was like a positive feedback loop on YouTube, they would have made it work, right? They would have found a way to make it work. The reason they left isn't just 100% because of personal reasons. It's because there was no longer value. Like they were like, what's the point? Like, why am I showing up every single day just to be trashed on? Like, what's the point? And so people forget that it really actually is that toxic like cycle of negativity that did make all the great pillars leave. And I even talked to a couple of other people who I wish had a bigger voice, had a bigger platform, but they choose not to. They choose not to teach. They choose not to show up at presentations or do events or go out there, or definitely not put themselves on the internet, because they're like, well, I want to keep my spiritual practice spiritual. I don't want to put it out there for the gaze. I really want to keep it something that is more interpersonal. And now, as a consuming public, we lose that insight. We lose that contribution.
Mm. It definitely does drive people away. And there's a real thing around the fear of negativity, I think. And we mentioned that a bit earlier, like being worried about making certain videos because of the fear of the impact of what negativity would then have on us. And it does get to this point where you're making decisions based on, I mean, it may be off past experiences, it very likely is, but there is a fear element to it too, of just not wanting to invite more negativity in. So we look at minimizing the damage in some ways, and actually that can be even more damaging, because then we're asking ourselves, do we want to create? And that's awful in some ways, because we should absolutely want to create, and it likely helps other people, touches other people, reaches and tells a story, which connects us through this medium. But that fear of not wanting to do that thing because there's going to be negativity might get in the way of that, and that is actually really sad when you think about it.
I think the response that gets to me also is when people say, well, why do you care what people think about you? Like, okay, there is this, okay, truth bomb, okay? Like, just I don't know if people don't realize this, but every single person who is on the internet cares what people think about them. Like, or you're doing it for money, or it's just a pure 100% pure business transaction for you, and it's just about the money. So then you don't really care because you're getting the money. You're making six figures from it, so who cares what people think about you? But if you're creating free content, if you're showing up to produce free stuff, like, who does that and not on some level care what people think of them? And to say that, you like, even people who say, the person who utters that person cares what people think of them, for that person to deny that is just patently false. And so
Mm-hmm.
it always gets me when people say, well, why do you care what people think of you? I'm like, you know what, you're right. If I don't care what people think of me, I wouldn't even show up. I'm just not going to be on the internet. I'm just going to stop creating content.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's universally human to want to be liked, isn't it? Nobody, like, okay, like some people thrive on drama maybe, but generally speaking, people don't want to be disliked. Like, there are strange personalities that thrive on causing hurt and pain and misery and drama, and they thrive off that for whatever reason. I don't fully understand that mindset myself, so I can't really speak on it. But like, for most people, people want to be liked. People want to have friends. People want to have relationships with people. Of course they care. It's human to care what people think. We're a social animal by design. We do better when we feel supported and liked and loved. And so in a social media based world where a lot of us do connect through the internet, especially right now, then that's sort of a really strange question to ask people. I understand that they're trying to take the power away from a situation which they feel might be damaging to people, like, you care too much about what this person thinks. And I've had that said to me too, and I went the other way and I was like, yeah, not enough people care enough about what people think. Like, we need to care about other people more. We don't need to care about other people less. So maybe good opinion is not what we need to be caring about, but we do need to care about people. So it seems to be like, how do you can't really not care about what people think but still really care about people, because there's a disconnect there that doesn't work, because how you communicate with people is interacting with people, and you know whether or not somebody likes you or really doesn't like you. Generally you get a good feeling about it. So that's just part of human nature, isn't it, to me?
I think there's so many things to unwrap here. Like, first of all, I don't understand why, just because you are honest enough to acknowledge that somebody may have some power over you, that means you're powerless. First of all, even if
Mm.
you deny it, like, the amount of power we all have over other people in massive quantities is so frightening and so real. Just look at the coronavirus. Just think about the coronavirus. Think about the pandemic. The pandemic, if nothing else, is proof how much power you have over people you don't even know. Like the way it spreads just shows the amount of unintentional power people hold, and the amount of power that's kind of that hits you that you have no control over. So what's so wrong about just acknowledging that sometimes I am powerless and I'm affected by it? There's no shield, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, I just think it's just like a false positivity when I pretend that people don't have power over me. I think it's healthier for me to acknowledge that people far away can have a lot of power and influence over my well-being, and then go from there, you know. But before I've acknowledged that, and then figure out how I can, like, you know, forms of immunity, forms of protection, then we go from there. But to just patently outright deny that people have power over you, I think it's kind of silly, actually.
I think it's weird because we've sort of trained to deny the idea that people have, like you said, power over us, as if it's not like basically a symbiotic relationship we have with all people. Like, we have power over other people and people have power over us, and it's not this dogmatic game to see who can get one hand over up on the pile. You know, it's not who has the most power over everybody else wins, woo, because it doesn't work like that. We're all so interconnected, especially you become very aware of it in spiritual terms, of how we're connected to everything around us, not just people, like the whole planet. Coronavirus has taught us that too. Look at the massive changes happening in the world right now because of the lack of pollution and the animals and all that stuff, and that is directly correlated to an impact that we as human beings have, and we have the power to change. So there's massive implications of corona and how connected we all are. But I agree. I mean, I think if you're preoccupied with the power that you have over other people, you're ultimately probably just giving away your power over self, because the only true power that we ever really have is the power over ourselves, to learn about ourselves, to heal ourselves, to work with our own shadows, and so on. I think anything else is just illusionary. To think that you have it's both true and not true at the same time in my mind, because you do have all this power over other people, but it's not like you can sit there and be like, go my minions, do my bidding. It's not that kind of power. So you both have it, but you kind of don't have it at the same time. So it's like you're incredibly powerful and powerless all in the same moment of existence. And it all, I don't know that it matters coming out in the wash anyway. Really, is it going to make any difference in the long run to most people in their lives? I'm not sure if it does or not. Probably not. Happiness is what's going to matter to you, I think. Memories, the chances you took, and you have control over all of them. So, to a large degree anyway.
Agreed.
So don't let negativity interfere with that. I think power and negativity are very entwined. Like the desire to have the power over people, and it's very negative and always has a negative outcome. I can't think of any positive effects where people have wanted power and it's ended up a good experience.
And also, you know, in combination with that, when you acknowledge that somebody is affecting you, when you acknowledge somebody else's power, that is perceived as weakness. I think that's problematic as well.
Yeah, it doesn't actually take away from your own power to realize that other people have power. That's true. Like, it's a struggle, because we are basically taught the pie method in our society, that is, if you have more, then someone else has less, and if they have more, then you have less. And there is that weird survival struggle thing that goes on in society, and it's not actually like that. Like, the world is not pie.
No, that's true. Like, it's exactly what you said earlier. There's a symbiotic relationship. Even the person who physically looks more powerful, the power and dynamics between a have versus a have-not is fascinating. A have cannot have without the have-not. You know, like they have power over each other in really complicated and intricate ways.
I really love this. It reminds me of the Game of Thrones quote that I really love, which is, where does power reside? And he's talking about it in terms of a sellsword, a king, and I forget what the third one, priest. And he's like, where does the power reside? And it's like, wherever man believes it does. And so that there's so many really great George R.R. Martin quotes. I love him, but
I do.
so much. Any man who must call himself king is no true king. I love that one too. That's that power thing. He has some fantastic power quotes, but it really is about belief. Like where you believe the power of something resides is where it truly resides for you, because that is what you believe. And that's such an interesting spiritual concept too, that where you believe the power is where the power will be for you. So it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy in a way. Yeah, we're sidetracking slightly, but it's fascinating.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh.
Well, shall we wrap up?
I think we shall. I think that's probably a good place to wrap up.
Because apparently videos have to be 60 seconds, Joey. You've gone a little bit over your 60-second mark.
I'm going to cut this into like 160-second little videos and put them all up on TikTok, like one at a time.
Oh, good Lord.
Sounds like way too much work. Let's not. So thank you so much for joining me today and chatting all about all sorts of things, but mainly negativity in the community. And I hope everybody's having the least negative experience they can have right now with Corona and all that going on. And just know you're not alone. So if you are struggling, you're not alone in that. We're all in the same boat. Very
and
much
thank
so.
you for taking time to chat with me. So.
Well, thank you so much for coming on.
Well, I always love talking with you.
Oh, thank you so much. So that's it for today, guys. I'll see you all very, very soon, and many blessings.